partial rendering in Next.js 14. So first, I'm going to do just an overview of what it is using the Next.js docs here, and then we're going to spin up our own demonstration application to where I'm going to show you a somewhat practical example of when you might use partial rendering and a cool way to do like a skeleton component, as well as showing you how this might be beneficial in your actual applications. So partial rendering is an optimization for your web applications, in which if I scroll down here, you can see that in their docs here, they have this page that it has a shopping cart as well as a recommendations component. And both of these are rendered within suspense components, in which they provide a fallback component. So it's basically saying like, okay, if this component isn't ready to render yet, then render out this fallback component. And the benefit of doing this is that if I scroll down here further, you can see that with the generated HTML here, they effectively can pre-render and just serve this HTML statically. So everything that's outside the suspense component, and then as those suspense components or those components within those suspense boundaries, as those components then start rendering, well, it can actually stream that HTML to the browser. So the benefit of this is you can show basically your entire web page, except for those two components, right away to the user. So you can immediately serve this kind of static HTML shell here, and then you can fill in the shopping cart and the recommendations component as the components actually finish rendering. So you can statically serve all of this HTML, this banner component, these new products, and all this. But then as the shopping cart and as the recommendations load, you can stream those to your web page. So that will at least improve the user experience by still showing the user most of your page, but then maybe rendering out a skeleton component of a shopping cart or maybe a loading indicator or something like that. So that's kind of the benefit of doing this. But now let's head over to VS Code and show you a demonstration of doing this here. So what I'm going to do here is just create a template application. So npx create -next-app at latest. Now, there is, if I come back here and I scroll down, you're going to see there are some prerequisites to Next.js 14, in which you need to have at least 18.17 for Node.js. I had to upgrade mine when using Next.js 14, so make sure you're doing that. But then if we come back here, the name of my project, I'm just going to call this partial-rendering. I'm not going to use TypeScript. I'm not going to use ESLint. We are going to use Tailwind CSS, no SRC, and I am going to use the app router. I'm not going to customize the default import alias. So this is going to render, or this is going to create this application. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do file, open, and then open this application within VS Code. So I've just opened up the starter project here. I'm going to open this app folder here. I'm going to assume you have some familiarity with Next.js. If anything I cover in this video, it's not clear, there's a good chance I already have a tutorial on it that you can go check out, or you can let me know in the comments and I'll try to help you out. But we're going to start with our page file here, and I'm going to rename this to JSX, just because for one, I like the icon better, and for two, I get better code completion this way. And I'm going to remove everything within my main tag here. So I'm going to scroll down and remove everything within that main tag. What we're going to do here is I'm just going to kind of template out a couple of things. I'm going to template it out in each one that just says post page, because what we're going to do here is I'm going to use a free API. It's called like JSON placeholder API. And we're going to create a page in which we have different posts that we display. But we're going to also add like a delay to getting those posts. So that request to go get those posts from that API actually takes a long time. So we're going to kind of mimic rendering out this page, but wrapping our posts within a suspense boundary and then render a skeleton component. So our post skeleton. So first we're just going to add an H1 that says post page. And then let's also add maybe a paragraph here that just has some lorem ipsum text. So I'm just typing lorem, and then I have an autocomplete abbreviation there. These are the only things I'm going to render right now. And then I'm just going to do npm run dev. And then I'm going to open this up at localhost 3000. So localhost 3000 here. I'm going to refresh this page, and I see post page and then a paragraph below. But now between these, what we're going to do is render a couple different posts within this page using that API. So what I am now going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go create a posts component. So let me come back, and I'm going to create a components folder here. And then I'm going to create a capital POSTS posts.jsx file. And I'm going to actually close this. And then what we're going to do here is I'm going to export a default function, and it's going to be an async function called posts. And what we're going to do here is we're going to accept a delay because I'm going to render two post components, and I'm going to have them render at different times so you can kind of see how this works. For now, we won't do that right away, but we will pass a delay prop to this. And then within this, we need to have some way of slowing the rendering of this component down. So I'm going to actually create another function up here, and it's just going to be function sleep. It's going to take milliseconds as an argument. And then what it's going to do is return a new promise in which we are then going to resolve that promise after a certain amount of time. So we're going to set timeout, and we are going to resolve that promise after a certain amount of time, milliseconds. And then at the top of this file, we're going to await, call our sleep function, and then pass in the delay prop. So what this is going to do is this is going to basically block the rendering of this post component at this line of code. It's going to await at this line of code for a certain amount of time. And this will kind of mimic a slow API request. And we technically wouldn't even need to use this free API. We could really just do this, then render out like some just dummy data from post, but we'll make a request to this API regardless, which will probably also slightly slow this down as well. So by returning this promise here, this will effectively suspend this component for this amount of time, whatever we pass in as a delay to this post component. But then down below here, I'm going to say const res is equal to await, and then we're going to fetch a URL that is going to be https://JSON placeholder dot typecode.com/posts !_ limit is equal to 2. So we're going to make a fetch request to this JSON placeholder.typecode.com API. It's a free API that we can use to just get some dummy data here. And we're going to limit it to just 2 posts that we're going to get. And then once that is done, we're going to do .then response is response.json. And then we're going to call that as well. And it might actually make more sense if I don't call this response. I'll just call this posts right here. And then within this, all we need to do is a return, and we're just going to return a div that does posts.map. It accepts a post, and then we're going to return, well, we're going to want to return a post component here. So let's just go ahead and do a post component. We're going to do key is going to equal post.id. This JSON placeholder, each post will have an ID, and each post will also have a title and a body, but we'll just say post data. is equal to post. And then I need to close this component. However, we don't have a post component yet. So now I'm going to save this file, but then we're going to create a new file, and it's just going to be post.jsx. And then what we're going to do for post.jsx is I'm going to export a default function called post, and it's going to take a post data property, which is what we're passing right here, post data property. And this is going to contain post information, and we're going to return our post data here. But I have written out some CSS here, so I don't really want this to be too much about styles here. So I am just going to copy and paste the rendering HTML or the CSS from this, but I'll explain kind of what it's doing here. If you want to try writing the Tailwind CSS styles, it's just like a exercise for you. Go ahead and do it. If you also want to just copy and paste this, you could also go ahead and do it. I'll link my GitHub repo of this final project here in my description below, which, there's nothing crazy that we're doing here. That's really kind of the point of this video. So I think that's a reasonable thing to do. But I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. And basically what we're doing is just a wrapper div. And then we basically have our post data.title here, as well as our post data.body within a div and a paragraph tag. So very straightforward. We're just rendering out this data with some CSS styles wrapping around it. But now within our posts, we should be able to render our post component here. So I'm importing post from post. Now with this in place, what we can actually do is I can return to my page.jsx here, and we can actually render our posts component within our page here. And we can see if our kind of partial rendering works here. So I'm going to render out a suspense component here. I'm going to import suspense from React. And then within it, I'm going to render out my posts. But for this, we also need to make sure that we are rendering out a fallback component. And for now, I'm just going to render out an H1. It just says loading. But we will make a posts skeleton here in just a second. I just want to see this working. But then I'm also going to render out a delay. Let's just do 5 seconds. So 5,000 milliseconds. And I'm going to remove this image component as well at the top of this file. So what we should see here, if I didn't make a mistake, is when I go to my homepage and I refresh, I should immediately see my post page as well as my paragraph here. But as my posts here, it's going to suspend here for 500 milliseconds until this promise resolves. And then it's going to go get these posts, and then it's going to return my posts. And while it's doing that, I should see in my post page here, just an H1 that says loading until those posts come in. So let's go ahead and see if that's what I see. So I do see my 2 posts right here, as well as my post page and my paragraph. But if I do a Command-Shift-R and hard refresh this, I should see loading for 5 seconds, and then my posts do indeed appear. So what we're doing here is we're showing the user the kind of static page that we can show them. So you see when I refresh this, we basically see post page as well as this paragraph immediately. That is just like statically served to our page. But then we kind of progressively load or progressively render or partially render this post component here when it's ready. And in the meantime, we just show a loading indicator. But let's actually adjust this a little bit. And let's actually show a posts skeleton.jsx. And within this is basically going to be our fallback component. So I'm going to create a function called post skeleton. And you could do these in 2 separate components here, in 2 separate files. I'm just going to keep it in the same file since these are like pretty much dependencies of each other. So I'm going to just The fancy term would be co-locate these in the same file, but you could do what you want here. I'm going to say function post skeleton. And what we're going to do in here is I'm going to return just like a skeleton of a single post. And I already have the CSS written out for this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that within this post skeleton. So we're just rendering out a kind of section for the title. We're putting a space between the title and body. And then we're rendering out the body here. And then we're also just rendering out like a card. And we're actually going to make like the title kind of pulsate a little bit. So we're doing an animate pulse within Tailwind CSS. So you can see here with very little like CSS, we can actually render out a nice little post skeleton. So you can go to my GitHub and just kind of copy this. Not kind of particularly the point of this video, but I think this will be kind of cool. And then below this, I'm going to export a default function called posts skeleton. And, you could potentially put in a dynamic variable here for how many posts that you want to render out. Since I'm using a limit of 2, we're just going to use 2, but you could adjust this for your own use case in like a real world application here. But we're going to return just a div, and then this div, it's going to have a class name of w-full. So we're going to make it full width. And then we're also just going to render out an array of length 2. And then we're going to map over that array, and we're going to take the index, and then we are going to return our post skeleton with the key set to our index and close that up here. So this is kind of just a, hacky way to render out 2 different post skeletons within our posts skeleton component here. And like I said, if you wanted to make this dynamic, you could put like, amount of posts to render as a prop here and just place that right here within your array. But we're just going to hard code it with a magic constant, which I generally wouldn't recommend in like a production application, but for our purpose here, it's going to be just fine. And just to really quickly interject here. So there was just a slight error here in which I also kind of didn't notice and then forgot to show the solution of it, to where you need to make sure to close your array here. So your post skeleton, it should make sure to close your array here. I think what you're seeing right now is this end square bracket is missing. Make sure to put that in here and you should have no issue. So just make sure that your post skeleton looks exactly like this, and it should work. I ended up fixing this later on, but make sure that you do indeed do this. But now we're going to use this post skeleton. So I'm going to copy this label here, go back to our page, and then instead of just this H1 here as a fallback, we're going to render out this post skeleton. And let me go ahead and make sure that gets imported here. So now let me come back, and you see that I already see my skeleton here. But let me do a hard refresh here. And you can see I'm rendering out these skeleton components here for about 5 seconds, and then I render out my posts. So let's adjust this slightly and then come back to my suspense here. And then let's render another kind of post component here, but let's maybe give it 10 seconds. So if we're doing this kind of partial rendering thing correctly, we should see my post page as well as this paragraph right away. But then after 5 seconds, we should see this post show up. And then after 10 seconds, we should see this post show up. And this is to kind of demonstrate that you can use multiple suspense boundaries within like a single component here to partially render different sections of your page. So let's come back here and we see them both rendered. Let's do a hard refresh here. And what you can see is that I have my first skeleton here, which does indeed show up after 5 seconds. And then after 10 seconds, I do indeed see my second post show up. So this is how in Next.js 14, you can use partial rendering to improve kind of the user experience of your page. And like this prevents us from just showing a single loading indicator for this page until our kind of slowest component renders here. Like imagine how crappy this UX would be if like I refreshed and I just saw a loading indicator. I didn't see post page. I didn't see this paragraph. Maybe I have other content like a sidebar here and then this renders, but since this isn't done, I still wouldn't see this. So that just wouldn't be a great user experience. So I think this is a really cool thing that you can do. And I think these skeleton components are also kind of pretty cool as well. So hopefully you learned a lot from this video. And with that, I will see you in the next one.